Hello, and thank you so much for joining us for Inside the Newsroom, the show where I take you behind the headlines of our top stories with our staff members who put them together. I'm your host, Joey Taylor. First, for the first time in more than a year, former Governor Noem has formally and publicly addressed the people who elected her to the state's highest office in her home state last week. Now, this was at the unveiling of the life-sized bronze statue created in her honor. KELOLAND's Dan Santella was there and spoke with former governor following the event.
Brought the state's 33rd and 34th leaders together again.
When she asked me to be her running mate, I think it took me a sum total of 2 seconds to say yes. And in retrospect, I think that was probably a pretty wise decision. In all seriousness, I fully understand that I wouldn't be here today serving as your governor without Noem.
We have just so appreciated Larry and Sandy and their friendship over the years and all that they have done to walk alongside of our family. You know, you all know our family, and Brian and the kids have done everything with me as I've served in whatever role that I was in. And
Noem departed the governor's office in Pierre to become Homeland Security Secretary in President Donald Trump's second administration. She was then appointed Special Envoy to the Shield of the Americas earlier this year.
What especially has your energy and focus as Special Envoy to the Shield of the Americas? Like, what's a 9 to 5 look like?
oh my goodness, well, it's not really a 9 to 5. I have the opportunity to work with all the countries in the Western Hemisphere to help them do what we've done at the Department of Homeland Security over the last year and a half. So we're working with them to help them secure their borders, deal with illegal immigration.
And although she has not had a vocal presence thus far with Roden's campaign to remain in office, she speaks glowingly of her successor.
I think Larry's doing a great job. I always knew that he would. He's a steady man who makes wise decisions.
I also asked her about her own future.
What does 2027, 2028 and beyond look like? Might we see you on a ballot again in South Dakota?
Oh, I don't know. I wouldn't take anything off the table, but I'm planning on doing the work at the State Department and continuing to help President Trump be successful.
And Ray Yost joins us now. Ray, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joey.
All right, so I know that was Dan's package, but it really was a team effort covering the unveiling of Kristi Noem's statue last week in Pierre. Bob, Mercer, and Dan were in Pierre, but we had our entire digital team here working on the articles and watching the live stream that they were doing, and then back there in Pierre, but then we also were here on KELOLAND Plus live streaming that event. So, Ray, can you talk to me a little bit about your hand and what role you played?
Well, I was I was watching the live stream and listening because, knowing that Dan was going to have a package later and that Bob Mercer was going to have a package later, I just wanted to get up some of the bare bones stuff that was discussed. You know, when you think about it, it was roughly an hour-long presentation. So, and then we had hoped to get some follow-up questions with the former governor afterward. So when you look at an hour-long presentation, we're probably not going to get in any one story every single detail. So my role was kind of just if you were watching along and if you were reading it, I was going to give you some of the stuff that was happening kind of as it happened. So that was really my role, is to focus on, okay, we had some remarks by the lieutenant governor, then we had some remarks from others involved, but it was me just keeping you informed as it was happening.
Absolutely. Well, and I have the article you and Bob really worked on here. Can you talk to me a little bit about really what went on in the live stream and what was talked about for those who maybe weren't able to watch?
Yeah, so it starts back to the basics with Bob writing a bit, kind of a preview story to tell people when the event is happening, how they can watch it, how they can follow it. And then it's a handoff, so to speak. So what I'm looking for is, what will people kind of want to know as it happens? Well, they're going to want to know a little bit about who is in the audience. And then you include some things from the former governor's speech about, thanking her family for supporting her. And then you can see in the video that there's, she's got kids helping with the unveiling, grandkids helping with the unveiling as well. And then just to give people a little feel before it happens, we had some photos sent to us by Dan, just kind of showing the difference between what was happening at about 9:30 and how things really filled in as the ceremony got closer to 10. I just wanted to include little tidbits about the biography that was read that's going to be on her statue. So when folks come to visit it, they can get an idea for a feel. It's going to talk about her, time as governor, and then it might, talk about her growth in the economy and tourism, and also her time at Congress. One of the other things that Bob had kind of outlined that I was able to talk a little bit more on Friday was the Trail of Governors itself and how the city of Pierre really takes ownership and pride in that.
Absolutely. Well, and I know Dan did a preview story on Thursday when he went up to Pierre, really highlighting the history of that. But Ray, when you're talking about all of this coverage, that we really had this team effort between you, between Bob, between Dan, and really the rest of our digital team, because like I'm saying so many times over and over, people are probably getting sick of it. It really is this team effort. Can you talk to me a little bit about the importance of why Kelo puts a big emphasis on us being a team in this capacity?
Yeah, when you look at, if you were watching it, you had I think you and Maddie were discussing it as it was happening. You kind of did I'm going to call it pregame, and then during. And then you look at what was happening on the website with streaming and the Digital Plus streaming and Dan and Bob out there. I think one of the things to emphasize is Bob is the Capitol reporter, so we obviously want him involved because he's around it, all year long. He lives in Pierre and he's around it during session and off session. He's on that campus, so you want him involved. Then you want obviously a broadcast piece that goes on, different news programs, different tidbits. So it's important to have a broadcast reporter out there, or MMJ as we call them. And then you want something back in the studios, you would say, in the digital desk, where we have our new, it's a new broadcast piece that we can use differently than their traditional noon, 4, 5, and 6 news. So you folks back here in the digital studio can add another layer as people watch the actual unveiling and watch the program. And then you have we're streaming that through KELOLAND.com, our website. So you want the web team involved because they're helping set up that whole stream that we're talking about. And then the web team involved from the standpoint of real time, taking additional notes or additional details, writing additional details that can't always get covered when you're talking about it in real time. I mean, there's a lot of moving pieces. And I think the other thing why this was so key this year is we hadn't heard a lot from the former governor since she became the DHS secretary, and we didn't always get a lot of one-on-ones interview while she was governor. So I think people were just interested in hearing what she had to say, period, whether we got that interview afterward, but also during the whole ceremony, because she was certainly elected overwhelmingly. She had a level of popularity in the state. And she even joked that usually these statues, she thought, always went to past governors who may have been deceased. Now, that was a joke because that doesn't always happen. But when you think about it, she's still very much in the public eye. So I think there's a lot of factors in there that made it important to have a team effort.
Absolutely. Well, Ray, thank you so much for your insight, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, folks, it's still to come. Keeping cattle in certain pasture without physical fencing. A closer look at virtual fencing in the ag industry when we come back. Welcome back. There is a new kind of fencing on some South Dakota farms and ranches. KELOLAND's Anya Joseph takes us to Wallace, South Dakota, and shares one operator's experience with the new technology.
Cattle operations across South Dakota are getting a chance to test out new technology, known as virtual fencing.
Through some of our rougher topography areas or high water and low water areas, we looked into the virtual fencing as a way to enhance and capitalize on more grazing opportunities in those areas without the need for physical fence.
Lee Waslin's cattle graze in different locations, which benefits his farm's plant communities and harvest efficiency. In the past, that required building temporary fences. But with GPS collars, all he has to do is draw a boundary line on his phone or computer.
Maybe it is something that you want to move them more often, but the time is really tough, or having enough people to be able to move your fence that often, because you can use, hot wire fence where you could move them on a daily basis, but it takes your time and effort to make sure you can do that. Where this way, you can do that right on your phones or on your tablets.
The South Dakota Soil Health Coalition leases out the collars so producers can test them out and see if they want to invest in the technology.
With the use of the virtual fence, we've been able to increase that harvest efficiency to probably closer to 35 to 40% utilization. So they're in a smaller area for a shorter time, but they are grazing, and actually more of it's going down their throat and being turned into beef.
Easing the workload gives operators time to maintain their lives outside of farming.
Back to the operations, we want to keep the family farms healthy, and we want to keep those producers healthy. So if this helps them to spend more time with their kids, we really want to see that. We want them to be able to go to the ball games instead of moving fence, right? They can do that prior to it and just keep the South Dakota agriculture healthy.
And Anya Joseph joins us now. Anya, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so let's talk a little more about your story. First, talk to me a little more about the atmosphere there, because I know when I did agriculture stories, I absolutely loved being around all of the cattle and the cows. I love cows. They're one of my favorite animals, and just being around them. So talk to me a little bit about just the atmosphere for you.
I think it was pretty cool. It was kind of out of, my element. I am born and raised in Boston, Massachusetts, and then I move over to West Palm Beach, Florida with my mom. So the city life is pretty much ingrained in me, so it really felt nice to just be out there on, the acres of land, getting to see just how they utilize, the GPS collars, what it looks like on the phone, and how it makes life easy for, a cattleman like Lee Wasland.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and so I know it's one of the staple questions I really ask on Inside the Newsroom, and that's what we're not able to fit into our stories as journalists, because we really are only able to put on TV about 1:30 to 2 minutes. This story was about 1:49. So what maybe weren't we able to fit onto or into the broadcast on-air story?
Right. You bring up a great point. It's kind of hard to capture everything into 90 seconds or just a little bit more. So I felt like what was missing for me was probably the mechanics of the app, or how to use, the virtual fencing on the computer as well, just how to use it, because I'm sure, talking about virtual fencing, a lot of cattlemen or just cattle producers in general are curious as to what, virtual fencing is just a little bit more in depth, but I felt like I couldn't go more in depth with that. I had to hit all the elements. So that was something that I felt was missing. And probably I did tap on it a little bit at the end about how this makes, just producers and agriculture like on the healthier side, just dealing with allowing producers to be with their family. But I felt like I wanted to tap into that probably just a little bit more, but I did get a little bit of that in there, so it's good.
Absolutely. Well, and it seems like it really goes full circle and really kind of giving that a little more farm to table. Can you touch on that a little more?
Yeah, I definitely think it's important. I did use some sounds like that for what we call our cut downs, which is like a smaller teaser to the story and a smaller element of it. Just talking about how all of this goes back into the consumer. We go to the store, we see 100% grass-fed beef, but I really got to be in the element of the cattle that's eating the grass, So I thought that was really cool. So yeah, it was pretty much farm to table, getting to see that. I did thank Lee. I said, thank you for your service and time, because you just put a face to the producer, and it's really nice.
Absolutely. Well, Anya, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, folks, we'll be back after this short break. Welcome back. Joining me now is Kelsey Dennehy, because we have some sports news to talk about. Adam Vinatieri was inducted to the Pro Football Hall of Fame last week, and because this is Inside the Newsroom, and that's pretty big news that happened inside the newsroom. We wanted to bring on our sports team to talk about it because I'm not a sports reporter. I like to talk about sports. I like to watch sports, but I do not have all of the knowledge like Kelsey does. So I'm going to let Kelsey kind of lead the conversation in this one. Kelsey, talk to me about all the news that was buzzing last week.
It's really exciting. I mean, Vinatieri was one of 5 former professional football players to be inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. The class of 26 is, any class being inducted is generally a smaller class, just about a handful of former professional athletes. And so that on its own is a huge deal. Vinatieri is also a kicker, and he holds quite a few records in the NFL, which, again, that standing alone is one of the many reasons why he was inducted into the Hall of Fame in the class of 2026. So just really exciting. He is an alum of South Dakota State, where he kicked and punted, and he still holds the highest scoring record for the school, I believe, to this day, which is kind of a crazy concept.
Yeah, well, and that's why it's such big news for South Dakota and why a lot of people here are really excited.
Well, and I guess I probably should have prefaced for those that aren't familiar with Adam Vinatieri. He is from South Dakota. He went to school in Rapid City and played for the Cobblers. Carly Phillips did a story this past week about it that you can check out on KELOLAND.com. That was a great story. To give a little bit of background, and then he went undrafted after going to SDSU, was signed by the New England Patriots, where he played for 10 seasons, and then he went to the Indianapolis Colts for 14. He won 3 Super Bowls with the Pats, and then he won 1 Super Bowl with the Colts. So you can see it there. He is the NFL's all-time leading scorer, holds records for field goals made, most postseason points, most consecutive field goals made, and overtime field goals made. It pretty much speaks for itself. And then he chose Colts owner Carly Gordon to present him into the class of 2026, the Pro Football Hall of Fame. When you're inducted, you get to select who presents the induction to you. And so that is who he chose. He said he would have loved to have the late Jim Irsay present him with the honor of being inducted into the Hall of Fame. But unfortunately, Jim Irsay has passed away, so he was able to include his daughter, which was really special.
Absolutely. Well, and you got to think, too, with the New England Patriots, I'm sure you watched Vinatieri
yes.
quite frequently.
Vinatieri is a household name in New England. He has come up with some of the most clutch plays in those Super Bowl wins that we talked about, which is always really fun to look back on, and feels a little bit full circle now that we're talking about this in my first job post-grad as someone who grew up in New England and grew up kind of experiencing those moments firsthand. So it's really cool. And I think another tidbit that people maybe don't know or have forgotten is Adam Vinatieri is actually related to a pretty important person in the Sioux Falls community. The newly elected mayor, Christine Erickson, is his sister. So really, we've just got connections to South Dakota all over the place.
Absolutely.
And then also those New England and Indianapolis connections, as well, as he had a pretty profound impact on both of those communities.
Absolutely. Well, Kelsey, thank you so much for joining us on Inside the Newsroom.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
All right, folks, we have to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to be talking about back to school and KELOLAND U Share. Don't go anywhere. Inside the Newsroom, we'll be right back. All right, folks, to wrap up our show today, we have a couple of our news producers joining us. That is Emma Johnson and Cullen Meffert. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thanks for having us on.
Thanks, Joey.
All right, so we are talking all about Inside KELOLAND and U Share. So to start, let's talk with Emma all about this past weekend's episode of Inside KELOLAND. I was able to host that while you put it together. Thank you so much for that, giving me a great show.
We were very excited.
But we talked all about back to school season. We talked with superintendents, pediatricians, and some local folks just about back to school season to make sure parents were prepared. Talk to me just a little bit about how you're able to produce that, but also just the importance of producing an IK inside KELOLAND and kind of what goes into that, but also back to school season.
Yeah, it's super fun to do the back to school special. I did it a couple times when I was an intern, and I think it's just such a fun special to produce, especially because, you know, it generates that excitement, but also especially if there are parents who are taking their kids to school for the first time, maybe their kids have been in school for, you know, years. It's still nice to kind of have a few reminders, and I think it's one of my favorite inside KELOLANDs to produce because there are so many different angles you can take. I was really glad that Jamie Knowles wanted to come and talk about his second year of being superintendent. Thought that was really fun. And then, yeah, I just wanted to kind of cover all the basics, you know, saving money for school supplies, how to keep, you know, families healthy and safe during the school year so their kids don't miss a lot of school. And then just kind of rounding it out with teacher retention and then the literacy program that's starting here. So in Sioux Falls. But yeah, it's just fun. It's well-rounded. It kind of generates excitement, but I feel like it answers a lot of parents' questions too. And I just have to give a shout out. You did an amazing job being the host as well.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. Well, and Cullen, let's chat with you quickly about YouShare. So YouShare is a place where people can submit photos, and I know you love it doing that for First at 4. So talk to me a little bit about that.
It's a great way for our viewers out here in KELOLAND to let us know what's going on, and it can be anything like you have up on screen now. Beautiful sunsets. Animals popping up. A while back, we had a badger sticking its head out of its hole that it dug. And then there's also over in Alvord, we had some residents going in and rescuing a cat that got stuck in a drain. It can be anything you see out there. Let us know about it. And that's KELOLAND.com/YouShare. That's the best way to get it to us.
Oh my gosh, Colin, give me 2 seconds. Keep talking. I want to pull
I
up
should mention, though, too, with our back to school page,
Yep.
or we're asking for
Yep.
families to do back to school photos with their kids to send in, too. So that kind of ties in. We did tease the back to school page, but we are looking for back to school photos
And-
when
yeah.
the first day of school happens.
That, like I said, it can be anything. Like we have, whenever the Northern Lights pop up, yep, there's that cat that was rescued. Anytime the Northern Lights stretch down in here, those are always a beautiful sight to see. Like Emma said, any back to school photos you have, send it to KELOLAND.com/YouShare.
All right, folks, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for joining us.